Good afternoon, and welcome to the Wednesday afternoon call with Trusts Unlimited. This is Jim George speaking. I'm the non-attorney spokesman and facilitator for Trusts Unlimited, and I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to listen to this call. I don't know whether we're going to have time to get to a Q&A today, but today's going to be a rather long call. I was recently at a birthday party for one of my children. So the kids were there and their children, our grandchildren, were there. And it really dawned on me what a mess has been created in this country in the last year. And so I decided that in addition to discussing all of the reasons why those of us that have currencies need to get our affairs in order, and that involves primarily establishing a protective trust. This applies to every American who wants to live the American dream and is trying to protect himself, his family, and his wealth from these heartless kleptocrats in Washington. Having worked in Washington, I can tell you I know what I'm talking about. And this is a bad bunch in there right now. And so my call today is going to be a response to what's going on and what we can do about it. A couple quick announcements here. As those of you who have been kind enough to listen know, our calls after actually over a decade by necessity became a little bit political. And coincidentally, after a decade of no issues, all of a sudden we had a problem with YouTube. Now, I think we've resolved our problem with YouTube, but I've made a few decisions, and one of them is that I've contacted both Rumble and Telegram, and I'm going to get our calls there. I'm hoping that this call will be there, but if not, I'm certainly hoping that by next week, our weekly calls will not only be back up on YouTube, but be on Rumble and Telegram as well. I was also contacted by someone who a lot of you may know goes by the name of Pimpy. They want to do a Q&A with me, and so I'm going to contact them and investigate doing that. I was also informed that the Trust Unlimited is now on the website of Charlie Ward. I don't know if you know who he is. He is what the government would call a a conservative right-wing, getting my mix all talked up here, right-wing conservative. So I'm going to see what that's all about. But first, I want to get into the situation here with Iraq. As we've discussed on numerous occasions, it's our view that the Iraqi Dinar is the linchpin for the potential reset of all of these other pre-valued currencies. So what's going on in Iraq seems to be of import from our perspective. Let's talk a little bit about the election of the President of the Republic and the other presidential seats in Iraq. Iraq has a parliamentary form of government, but in addition to that, it's a rather complicated and, in my opinion, convoluted in some ways system, the way it's been established. There's a lot of overlaps and I would argue gaps in the system. But, of course, the parliament was to elect a series of presidents, and, of course, that's been delayed due to a lack of a quorum, So that should be of no surprise to anyone that's been paying attention to to what's going on over there. However, on the more constructive side, the Sadrist coalition has firm control of the parliament. They will be selecting the prime minister, and we know two things. They're either going to select Kazemi or someone of his ilk, and Maliki is out. So that's very good news. We also learned that the Sadrists have opened a dialogue with the Quds forces, which are the Iranian militia that are running around in Iraq. And the statement they made was that they will be forming a government to represent the majority. Let me translate that. What that means is, don't worry, Iranians. The government will be run primarily by Sunni, even though they're going to be moderate Shia rather than the Sunni. But they're going to be moderate Shia. They're not going to be radical Shia, which the Iranians are. Now, we tend to look at what's going on with Iran and the rest of the Middle East solely through the prism of sectarianism. Now, it is true that the Iranians are radical Shiites. They are 12th Imamers. And I'm going to go ahead and suggest that you get a pencil and paper, because over the course of this call, I'm going to suggest you Google a couple of things. Do not take me at my word on this. But 12th Imamers are extremely radical Shia. And when you read their belief system, you will understand why they're so dangerous. But let's take just a quick look at the situation with the Iranians. Now, for millennia, the nation-state of Iran was referred to as Persia. But it wasn't until the 20th century that the name shifted to Iran. Iran is a Persian word. It means Aryan. Now, that's a strange thing to occur. Why would they go from Persia to Iran, which means Aryan? It's because the Iranians not only have tribal and sectarian issues with most of the Middle East, and particularly the Jews in Israel, but there's a racial component as well, because Iranians or Persians are Caucasian. As a matter of fact, the word Caucasian came from the Caucasus mountain range in Iran. And it was the Grand Mufti in the 40s, late 30s and 40s, who allied himself with Hitler, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who was one of the people who strongly urged Hitler to eradicate the Jews. So the Iranians are that is the Shia, the radical Shia Iranians want hegemony over the Middle East. And of course, Iraq is their golden goose. And they certainly want elimination of the state of Israel. And they've stated as much. So that's part of the problem that has existed since the fall of Saddam Hussein, who was a Sunni and who did abuse the Shias. So this is payback on steroids. Now let's talk a little bit about the revaluation, the reinstitution and revaluation of the currency in Iraq. And there have been a number of arguments why the reinstitution and inevitable revaluation thereafter should be postponed or should never happen. These arguments have some merit, but in my view, they will fall away. Now, the first argument was the money supply argument. There's just too much of the provisional 3-0 currency dinar out there. I've explained in detail on previous calls why I do not believe that's the case. They've also made the argument that there is not sufficient economic diversity in their economy. That's the situation which is being reversed in quick order as well. But the other argument is that Iraq can simply operate on reserve currency. And their argument is as follows. Today, as we speak, Brent crude is somewhere between $91 and $92 a barrel. Iraq has substantially increased its production of oil and continues to do so. They're currently bringing in $9 billion a month from the sale of petroleum, and that's about $108 billion a year. Their annual budget is about $60 billion a year, and they've got $64 billion hard currency set aside. So the argument is they don't really need to revalue their currency anytime soon, if ever, because they can operate with the reserve U.S. dollar. There's a couple of arguments against that. The 800-pound gorilla in the room is that the CBI is in control of the exchange rate. And what's the CBI doing? The CBI is working diligently to negotiate with Arab countries, Middle Eastern countries, and European countries the exchange of bank branches all over the world. Now, if the CBI and Iraq intention was to operate with the U.S. dollar reserve currency, they do not need to establish banks in other countries, and other countries do not need to establish bank branches in Iraq. They can conduct business through the Bank of International Settlement and avoid establishing banks. The only plausible explanation for establishing branch banks worldwide and receiving international branch banks in their country is because they intend to operate on their own currency. Now remember, Arabs are proud people, and they want to operate with their own currency if they can. As a matter of fact, it's some of the Arab countries that are trying desperately to establish their own currency and separate themselves from the central bank. Another issue here is that they want their own currency to be legitimate in their own country. They devalued their currency, not because the dinar was failing, but because they wanted to collect the 3 zero currencies so that they could introduce their own currencies. Why would the 8 regional banks in Iraq be holding all of the lower denom notes unless they were planning to use their own currency? And why would the CBI get involved in the expensive procedure of creating the lower denom paper currency that could not be counterfeited, although it would be kind of futile to counterfeit a smaller currency, but even the larger notes are all now being produced, I think by a German firm, its name escapes me, so that they can no longer be counterfeited. The only explanation for all of this is that they intend to use their own currency. And remember, lastly, that the CBI has stated publicly and repeatedly that the decision to change the exchange rate rests solely and unilaterally with the CBI. So while things have been postponed, which has been the case in Iraq since we've all been involved with their currency, they're still checking all of the boxes. They're now Article 8 compliant, the IMF. They've fulfilled their obligations to Kuwait. They've collected virtually all of the 3 zero provisional currency. They've put Iran on notice. So there'd be no reason for them to be doing all of these things and jumping through all of these hoops if their intention or objective, at least one of which, would be the reinstitution and revaluation of their currency. And another reason from a geopolitical point of view is that the revaluation of their currency will mean they will no longer be pegged against the U.S. dollar, which they want to avoid, and they will be pegged with the IMF basket, which is what they wish to accomplish. So, in my view, it's only a matter of when and not if this occurs. Now, having stated this, the reinstitution could happen shortly after the election of the presidents and the formation of the government. They do not need the passage of the budget. And if the budget should pass prior to the reinstitution, then the CBI can simply withhold payments until they readjust the rate. So a lot has been done. Very little is left to be done. and hopefully this will all get done in the very near future, i.e. this quarter. I see no reason why this cannot be accomplished this quarter, but as I always state, there's always an X factor, but the CBI has made it clear that they're going to make the decision, and for them to continually and emphatically state that's the case, to me, signals that they intend to make a decision sooner rather than later. Now, having said that, I want to get into the program that Trusts Unlimited has put in place to assist Dinarians. It's been over a decade now that Trusts Unlimited made a decision to help Dinarians. And the reason we even made that decision was because it just so happened that we were holders of the currency. And we knew that there were millions of Americans pursuant to Executive Order 13303 that also had the currency. But we also know that most of the individuals that held this currency did not hold a lot of it. They were hardworking middle-class individuals who have never managed a substantial amount of money. So not only were they going to be at some point faced with the management of a substantial amount of money, but it was literally going to happen overnight. So Trusts Unlimited has put a turnkey program in place to assist you, both pre- and post-RV. Now, phase one is pre-RV, and that would be the establishment of a pre-RV package of asset protection trusts. Post-RV would be all of the product, services, and professional referrals that will be made available to you after you've acquired this wealth. Now, what Trusts Unlimited has done is we have established a package of irrevocable trusts to protect not only your currencies and not only your wealth, but to protect you from the infringement of the rights that the present government is trying to deny you from. I'm going to get into that in a little bit more detail, which is why this call is going to be a little longer. But the package of trusts that we're going to discuss are the best asset protection available domestically in this country. I'm going to discuss all of the other asset protection entities that exist, and I'm going to explain to you why they're inferior to our package. First, a lot of individuals, whether you're Dinarians or you're in high-risk businesses or you just have a substantial amount of wealth you want to protect, have established LLCs or sub-S corporations. And these entities can provide some level of asset protection, but primarily by dividing business assets from personal assets. The problem here is that the currencies that you possess are a personal asset. In addition, courts have ruled that LLCs and sub-S corporations owned in the majority by one person or a closely held group like a family can be pierced for civil litigation. So the LLC and the sub-S corporation is not going to provide the protection you need, whether you're a Dinarian or whether you're just an individual that wants to protect his wealth. Another entity that people establish is something called a revocable trust, also referred to as a loving or living trust. Now, these trusts are designed primarily to exempt your estate from the cost and delay of probate, and if properly structured, they can substantially reduce or even eliminate the federal estate tax. But revocable trusts can provide no privacy or asset protection. So you're subject to litigation there as well. Some individuals have established something called an irrevocable trust. That provides much more asset protection than the other entities I just mentioned. But even the individual irrevocable trust has a flaw, and it's this. Everything you own would be housed in that one entity or legal person. So anything in that trust that is involved in litigation would necessarily bring all of the other assets and net worth into that litigation as well. So the individual irrevocable trust is not going to work for you. The only solution to these statutory vehicles is the creation of a common law asset protection trust package. Now, before I explain this package to you, there are some individuals that say the problem with an irrevocable trust is you have relinquished all control of everything in the trust. That's a half-truth. You see, there's two types of irrevocable trust. There are institutional trusts, and there are what we have designed self-settled irrevocable trusts. An institutional irrevocable trust is a trust that one establishes when they go to a bank or a brokerage firm or a trust company. If you go to them to protect your assets, you will utilize their trust with their terms, and they are the trustee. So in that situation, in return for the asset protection, you have relinquished a substantial amount of control. That is not the trust that we have established. Ours is referred to again as a self-settled irrevocable trust. What does that mean? It means that you have created the trust yourself. You are the settler of the trust. You establish the terms of the trust. You name the trustee that you feel you can work with, and you have the ability to A, replace that trustee at any time for any reason, and B, remove assets from the trust at any time and for any reason. So you will enjoy the privacy and asset protection, which I will explain in more detail, without relinquishing the control that you would with an institutional irrevocable trust. Now, I want to also touch on the history of trusts. And there's a reason I'm doing this again. We have, in my opinion, running this country right now, what I would refer to as post-constitutional progressives. In other words, they are on a daily basis and routinely doing whatever they want with no regard to your constitutional rights. And I'm not going to go into all the detail of that because anyone paying attention knows what I'm talking about. As a matter of fact, this government is over with the Supreme Court. Every time one of their edicts has gone to the Supreme Court, they've lost. And twice they lost 9-0. Even the most liberal justices on the court said, no, you can't do that. It's a violation of the Constitution. So the trust is a protection that they simply cannot circumvent. Now, where did these trusts come from? The protection afforded to you by trusts are literally part of Western civilization. They go back thousands of years. The Caesars of Rome utilized these trusts to protect their wealth from the Senate and allow their wealth to remain with their family, whether they ceded to the throne or not. After the fall of the Roman Empire, we entered the Dark Ages and the Feudal Ages. The royalty of those times utilized these trusts. The monarchies utilized these trusts to protect their wealth, and the royalty, the lower classes, utilized these trusts to protect their wealth. Even before the United States was formed, and individuals that came to this country and were given land grants by the monarchs of Europe subsequently established these trusts pre-Constitution to protect their wealth from cheating. In other words, rather than that land grant reverting back to the monarchy, these trusts allow the land to remain with their children and their grandchildren, their heirs. So these trusts are settled law. And again, I'm going to get into that in a little bit more detail. But now I want to explain to you why you need to establish these trusts prior to the revaluation of these currencies, and why these trusts have been utilized and people have taken flight to these trusts when they anticipated through an inheritance or other assets a substantial amount of wealth. So here are essentially the reasons why you want to establish this trust. First, these trusts protect your privacy and your anonymity. Why? Because these assets are shielded and protected. The general public will have no knowledge of your wealth because they will have no access to what's in your trust. If someone does a background check on you, the trust won't even appear because that's a separate entity. In addition, we know that 1 out of 4 millionaires will be sued in their lifetime. Why? More often than not, it's what they call nuisance suits. In other words, just give me a little bit of money and I'll go away. You won't have to go through a lawsuit. But if your assets are in a trust like this, no one knows what wealth you possess. And the only way that they would be able to determine that would be to hire an attorney, pay a large retainer in order to see if they can go to court and pierce your trust. Well, nuisance suit individuals aren't interested in spending money to see if you have anything. So those suits are gone. So this is why your privacy and anonymity is important. Second, by establishing this trust, you will avoid IRS scrutiny when the revaluation occurs. Why do I say this? If you are holding these currencies in direct title when they revalue, the IRS computers will probably spit out an audit. And with the potential wealth that you will acquire literally overnight relative to your prior year's earnings, the IRS may spit out a 6-year audit. Now, such an audit would be time-consuming. It would certainly be frustrating because it's come along at the precise time you've acquired this wealth, and there's many other things you'd rather be doing with your time and your money than dealing with an IRS audit. And lastly, an IRS audit, a 6-year audit, would cost substantially more than the cost of our trust. On the other hand, if your trust is in place, if your pre-RV currencies are assigned to the trust, there's less than a 10 to 15% chance that the IRS is going to audit your trust because it's a very sophisticated trust. The IRS is going to assume that you have qualified and intelligent and knowledgeable legal representation, and the IRS is known for going after the hanging fruit rather than getting involved in complicated cases. In addition, even if the IRS determines that they're going to audit your trust, they can't do a 6-year audit. Why? Because the only taxable event in the trust will be the revaluation itself. The third reason you'd want to establish this trust package is if you intend on gifting currency to family and friends. Many of you are generous people. You've acquired these currencies and you really want to help family and friends. Now, if you intend on gifting currencies to people that you feel can handle the post-RV sums, you can either give them the currency and a gift letter to let them exchange the currency for themselves, or you can provide the gift letter, conduct the exchange, and then give them their proportionate share. But if you are hesitant for any reason to give these individuals the post-RV lump sum, then we have established as part of our package a special gift subtrust. So you can gift their currency to them through this gift subtrust. This means that their currencies will be protected, their USD that is, will be protected along with yours after the revaluation. The language of this subtrust means you can give them that gifted amount of any currency or any portion of it, meaning that you can gift to them the exact US dollar amount that you had in mind, irrespective of the exchange rate. You will then have sole discretion about managing that money, how that money will be invested, and how you will distribute it to these individuals. The fourth reason you'd want to establish this this trust package is because it's been structured in such a way as to allow your estate to bypass the cost and delay of probate and the federal estate tax. I'm going to give you 2 quick scenarios. Scenario number 1, you purchase 5 million dinar for $5,000. The day after that, those currencies revalue for $25 million. The day after that, those currencies, you pass away, leaving your estate of $25 million to your heirs. Now that estate must go through probate, a process that ordinarily can take anywhere from 6 to 18 months. But probate is a public disclosure process, meaning that the general public will be aware of the size of your estate, who your heirs are, and how much they each stand to inherit. So if anyone feels they have a legitimate claim against you, your estate, or your heirs, they can simply file that claim with the probate court. And that could tie the estate up for years, and in some cases even decades. And your heirs will either have limited access or no access at all to their respective inheritance until the probate process is completed. Then there's something called the federal estate tax. This is the tax that the federal government would assess through probate in order for that estate to pass to your heirs. Under current law, approximately $10 million of that $25 million estate would bypass any federal estate tax. But the balance could be taxed as much as 65%. Now, this scenario is not only unacceptable, it's completely and totally avoidable. How? The protection afforded by trusts for 2,000 years. Scenario number 2, you purchase 5 million dinar for $5,000. The day after that, you assign those currencies on paper to our asset protection trust package. The day after that, those currencies revalue for $25 million. The day after that, you pass away, leaving your heirs that very same estate of $25 million, but this time protected in our asset protection trust package. As a result, there will be no probate. There will be no public disclosure of your estate. Your heirs will have immediate access to their respective inheritance, and the federal estate tax will be zero, saving each of your heirs as much as 55% of their inheritance. The fifth reason you'd want to establish this trust package is for some very specific asset protection benefits. Benefits which only exist if you have established a package of irrevocable trusts. Pre-RV, this package provides asset protection, something referred to as the Uniform Fraudulent Transfer Act. Now, what does that mean? Under our system of civil procedure, you can only be sued for what you actually own in direct title or the value of property when you transfer it out of title to an entity like our trust package. So let's take the previous example from before. You purchased 5 million dinar for $5,000, assign those currencies to our trust. They subsequently revalue for $25 million. You begin to live a lifestyle more reflective of your newfound wealth, and a couple of years down the road, someone sees that you're living rather comfortably and decides for whatever reason that they're going to sue you. Well, this prospective plaintiff is going to have a couple of problems. First, he or she better have a very strong case and very deep pockets, because this trust has been structured in such a way as to make it extremely expensive and extremely time-consuming for them to pursue civil litigation. But most importantly, once any prospective plaintiff learns that pursuant to the Uniform Fraudulent Transfer Act, the only thing they could ever win by way of a civil award would be $5,000, the value of the currencies at the time you transferred them out of title to the trust, and none of the post-RV value of $25 million, there will be no lawsuit. Post-RV, there's an asset protection benefit I like to refer to as limited liability stop loss. This will protect you from future bad acts after you have acquired this wealth. This protection is accomplished through a legal strategy referred to as segregation of assets. This is why we've established a package of trusts, and this is how it would work. Once again, let's use the same example. You purchased 5 million dinar, transferred them to your trust. They subsequently were valued for 25 million. Now that you have 25 million in trust, you decide to make some purchases. So you purchase a larger primary residence, a vacation home, perhaps a half a dozen rental properties for tax write-off and additional cash flow, a couple of cars, a boat, and let's say an RV. But as you purchase those items, you place each of them in their own separate subtrust to be managed by the master trust. Now, how does this protect you from an asset protection standpoint? Well, I'll give you an example. Let's say one day you're driving one of your new cars. You have an accident. The accident is clearly your fault, and tragically someone is seriously injured or even killed. Well, understandably, the family of the victim is going to want to sue you. But remember, civil suits are about monetary awards, and you don't legally own anything. So the plaintiffs would be left to sue the owner of the car that you were driving. Well, who owns that car? One of your subtrusts, of which you are merely the beneficiary. And what's in that subtrust? Merely that one car and the car insurance policy. In that scenario, the car insurance carrier will negotiate an out-of-court settlement with the victim's family. You will not be involved in those rather unpleasant negotiations. The car insurance carrier will repair or replace your car, making you whole, and this is important. And all of your other assets and net worth are safely protected in the other subtrusts. Why? Because under the law, those separate subtrusts are separate legal persons having nothing to do with the accident in question. Therefore, the plaintiff has no standing to pursue separate legal persons. And this protection is only available by establishing a package of irrevocable trusts. All of the other assets we discussed are statutory, regulated state by state. But this trust will protect you irrespective of the state or county that you live in. Now, these benefits are lost to you if you do not establish your trust prior to the revaluation of these currencies, and time may be running out. But there is one other benefit by establishing these trusts, and that is if you have one of our trusts and you've been a participant in phase 1 of our program, then you are eligible to participate in phase 2. All of the products, services, and professional referrals that will be made available to you after the revaluation of these currencies. Now, I'll just make mention of one here today. Trusts Unlimited will be sponsoring a post-RV seminar. Our plan is to hold it in Disney World, Florida, approximately 30 days after the revaluation of the dinar, and hopefully some of these other currencies. Now, there is a fly in the ointment. We cannot guarantee that the restrictions for a seminar in Disney will be what we want them to be. If the quote-unquote Omicron variant or some other variant pops up, we do not have control of what's going on there. But if they have restrictions and all kinds of things that are going to make it extremely difficult, rather than have the seminar there, then we will set up a DVD and or podcast and do the seminar inclusive of Q&A, hopefully, in our offices. Now, at this seminar will be, of course, our staff of Trusts Unlimited to assist and instruct you with the management and funding of your subtrusts. We also plan to have our tax specialists there as well. With the acquisition of this wealth, you're going to need to understand some of the more sophisticated tax strategies that we may need to employ in order to reduce not only the income tax, but I'm quite sure some of the punitive taxes they're going to try to enforce for those of us that acquired this wealth. We'll also have our independent fee-based wealth managers there as well. You're going to want to reposition assets after this revaluation for a number of reasons. First, we know statistically that 95% of all windfalls, however large and from whatever source, are lost within 3 to 5 years due to inexperience, mismanagement, and fraud. We also know that the global shift from fiat-based to Basel III compliant commodities, currencies, in and of itself is going to create extremely volatile currency and financial markets, and we're going to want a flight to security. We're going to want to move to tangible assets in order to avoid that volatility. Now, I want at this point to deviate a little bit and discuss with you, number one, how this opportunity of currencies came along and how it can be taken away from us. This is why we want to get our monies out of the banks after our exchange, out of currencies and into tangibles. And I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of history, how we got here. Because the history of where we are today began really over 100 years ago. But I'm going to start and talk a little bit about our Constitution. I'm going to read a couple of things here, and then I'm going to explain why I seem to have diverted into this subject matter. This is the United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, quote, Congress shall have the power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coin. Section 10, Article 1, no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. Again, Section 10.1, there shall be no law impairing the obligation of contracts or grant any title of nobility. Now, very briefly, what we're saying here is the Constitution afforded we the people to create our own currency, and that we are entitled to establish contracts. Now, this is important, and I'm going to explain why in a moment. I'm going to read to you a ruling from the Supreme Court. This is Lochner versus New York, 1905. This was a landmark decision of the Supreme Court, which ruled that we have an absolute right under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution to establish contracts. We can contract with one another. Now, this is important because a trust is a contract. When you establish, for example, our trust package, which is, again, a self-settled irrevocable trust, you have created a contract, which is a right of the Constitution, which you cannot be denied. Now, let me go further. The Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, quote, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, particularly ascribing the place to be searched and the persons and the things to be seized. In other words, once you exercise your constitutional right to contract, i.e. create a trust, that trust cannot be violated unless the government can establish probable cause. Now, why am I pointing this out? The 16th Amendment of the Constitution. This is what's gotten problematic for us. The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived without apportionment among the several states and without regard to any census or enumeration. This was ratified by Article 5 Convention, Constitutional Convention, which resulted in two things, the creation of the federal income tax and the Federal Reserve. Now, what is the Federal Reserve? It's neither federal or is it a reserve. It's a central bank. In other words, the federal government basically tricked us into the 16th Amendment. The way they did it was they said we were only going to tax 7% of your earnings above $500,000 a year. In other words, don't worry, we're only going to tax the uber rich. And $500,000 a year in 1913 were the uber rich. There was only several thousand individuals that the tax would have affected at that time. And a number of them expatriated from this country because they were furious and they understood what was going to happen. Now we all know what happened. The income tax is not a tax of 7% of our earnings above $500,000 a year. All right? But they went further. They created the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is a private institution that literally prints money, helicopter money, and lends it to the federal government. So the federal government needed to create the federal income tax to pay the interest on the debt to the central bank, which they didn't need to create because the Constitution allowed them to create their own currency. Okay, there have been 4 presidents that tried to stop the central bank. Andrew Jackson, you know what happened to him. Abraham Lincoln, you know what happened to him. JFK, we know what happened to him. And Donald Trump, and we know what's happening with him. The central bank just doesn't want to let go. This is where we find ourselves. Now, why is this important? Because in addition to the central bank system that our currencies are operating under, and we will operate under when we do our exchange, they're moving as quickly as they can to establish a global one world digital currency. Why are they doing this? Purely for control. They say that the digital currency is safe. It's only safe for them. It's not safe for us. It's not safe, for example, from cyber attacks. It's not safe from solar activity. It's not safe from an EMP weapon. That's an electromagnetic pulse. Can wipe it out, the entire thing. What the central digital bank, one world digital bank currency does, it establishes absolute and complete control of your wealth, which is another reason why you need to create a trust, why you need to exchange your currency inside of that trust, and why you need to transition from currencies to tangible assets within the trust itself. Now, our trust is initially a package of 10 trusts consisting of one master trust that will hold your assigned currencies pre-RV and financial assets like bank accounts, checking accounts, investment accounts post-RV. A gift subtrust if you plan on gifting currencies to family and friends, which subtrust can be converted to a standard subtrust, and then 8 additional standard subtrusts to hold physical assets like homes, cars, boats, etc. Now, this was the simplification of a rather sophisticated trust package that we were utilizing for our more affluent clients prior to the advent of these currencies. Now, this trust package had an initial cost of $6,000 to $10,000. But when we decided to work with Dinarians, we knew that price tag was going to be simply unaffordable for too many. But so by basically back-end loading this trust and simplifying the trust, we've been able to reduce the cost to $3,000. Now, there are several ways you can pay for that. If you pay us up front, we'll discount the price to $2,500, saving you an additional $500. If that's not possible, we even have a deferred payment arrangement. You make an initial payment of $525, which sum basically offsets our cost just to produce and deliver the trust to you. The balance of the $3,000 would then be paid in $100 monthly installments. We will charge no interest. The only proviso is once the revaluation globally of the Iraqi dinar occurs, any unpaid balance would need to be paid within 30 days. So with this approach, anyone that understands the need of creating their trust pre-RV to protect their wealth should be in a position to afford to do so. One other suggestion, we do accept credit cards. Pay us up front with a credit card. Not only will you get the $500 discount, but the minimum payment on the card would be less than $100 a month you'd pay under our deferred payment arrangement. But we will work with you in whatever method works best for you. Our objective is to help you get your affairs in order and your trust in force prior to the revaluation of the dinar and these other currencies for all of the reasons that we've stated here. Now, I've got a lot of people I've got to contact today. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to go to a Q&A today, although I do plan on going to a Q&A next week because I think we're back with the full trust package being discussed here on these calls. I think we're resolved our issue, quote unquote, with YouTube. I hope certainly by next week we will be on Rumble and Telegram, so we're going to be getting the word out. It's time to do so. I am going to give you information at the end of this call how to get our trust package. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and do that now. If you can be kind enough to contact us, we will be happy to send you our no-obligation initial trust package. It contains everything you need should you wish to proceed. There are wiring instructions if you want to wire us funds. There is even a credit card invoice if you wish to pay us by credit card, although the invoice automatically cancels after 5 days. You can review the package. It has a lot of information about us, about the trust, about the evaluation. You can contact us either by phone or email if you have any questions. We'll be happy to assist you in every way. There will be no consultation fee. Our website is trusts with an S, unlimited, LLC.com. Our email address is trusts with an S, unlimited, LLC at gmail.com. Our phone service is 307-274-4122. Now, before I say goodbye today, I'd like to leave you with one last thought. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Trusts Unlimited and why you may want to seriously consider contacting us to get our initial no-obligation package. This trust package was authored by our lead attorney, Robert Bly. He's been a practicing attorney for over 40 years, specializing in the areas of estate planning, asset protection, and offshore planning. I myself hold degrees in political science, macroeconomics, and finance. I've worked in these areas for over 39 years, and I, along with my clients, were personally involved in the reinstatement of the Kuwaiti dinar in the early 90s. So between the two of us, Robert Bly and I have about 80 years' experience working precisely in these areas, and I frankly know of no firm that can make that case. Now, as to our trust and its protection, I would only state that from time to time, and of course I'm an old timer, those of us that have been around for a while know that things happen in life, and it's at precisely those times in life that you need and want control that you can lose control. If you've lived for any length of time, you've experienced in your own life or through friends and family things like unexpected divorce, permanent incapacitation, the onset of dementia, premature death and prolonged and complicated probate processes. Then there are investment losses, business losses, and even bankruptcies. The number 2 loss of wealth these days, courtesy of the information age, is unfortunately identity theft. But the number 1 loss of personal wealth remains confiscation through civil litigation. Under our system of civil procedure, anything you own in direct title can be taken from you. So the only way under our system of civil procedure to control, manage, and protect everything at all times and in all circumstances is through the establishment of a package of irrevocable trusts, and particularly if you hold an asset like these currencies that you anticipate a substantial increase in value. And if you're kind enough to contact us, we at Trusts Unlimited will do everything we can to help you accomplish your personal and financial objectives both pre- and post-RV as we understand them. Again, thanks so much for taking the time to listen to this call. We will be back next Wednesday. Certainly, if something of a dramatic nature were to happen between now and then, we'll try to get an emergency email out and schedule an emergency conference call. But failing that, we will be back next Wednesday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. God bless and have a great week. Bye-bye.